Truth number 3. Yeshua does not tell us to keep the Sabbath. Well, we're going to find out if that's really true. Does Jesus really tell us not to keep the Sabbath? Does he really break the Sabbath? Does his disciples break the Sabbath? Do they keep the Sabbath on the seventh day? And if so, how did they do it? So let's get started. We see this all over the place over the last 10 or 15 years. This has been really popular. WWJD. What would Jesus do? I remember even kids wearing bracelets with that. Shirts that said, what would Jesus do? Posters, banners inside of churches. What would Jesus do? Well, let's ask the question. What would Yeshua actually do? Matter of fact, let's go beyond that. What did he do? What did he do? John 14:15 says this. If you love me, keep my commandments. Yeshua is talking here. If you love me, keep my commandments. Matthew 23:1 says, then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So before I go any further, let's talk about this. John 14:15 says this. Yeshua is talking. He says, if you love me, you will do exactly what I tell you to do. You will keep my commandments. Now the question is begging, which commandments? Well, let me ask you a question. If you believe that Jesus is God and he is the Word made flesh that created all of the heavens and the earth, then he wrote them all, ladies and gentlemen. He is the Word. He wrote all of them. He could not have wrote some, and his Father wrote some. He is the Word. He is the Torah made flesh. He is the reason for the season, if you will. And he said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Now watch what the next commandment is very carefully. Matthew 23. Then Yeshua said to the crowds and to his disciples, which is you, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, called the Bema seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. Well, when I was in Israel, and for those of you that have been there, you've been to some of the ancient synagogues, and what you'll notice is there's a stone seat. It's a stone bench, and it's called the Bema seat, or the Moses' seat. And every Shabbat, one of the rabbis or one of the people that is part of the local assembly would read the Torah. That was the only thing that you were allowed to do when you sat in that seat, was actually read. You were not allowed to commentate. You were not allowed to give your opinion. You were not allowed to preach. You were not allowed to add or take away from it. You literally only read the law and the prophets. When you stood up from that, you could commentate, you can argue, the rabbis would come together, they would give their opinion of it. That was fine. But when you're sitting in Moses' seat, you are only allowed to literally read the word of Yahweh. So what do we have here? We have first Yeshua saying, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments, and you'll do what I tell you to do. And secondly, what does he tell his disciples to do? To listen and do every single thing the Pharisees tell you to do from that seat. Why? Because when they're sitting in that seat, they're not commentating. They're telling you exactly what my Father told you to do 1,200 years earlier. They're speaking the Torah and the prophets. And Yeshua, in a very clear but indirect way, because most of us as believers do not grow up even knowing what Moses' seat is and the significance of it, or what they did when they sat on it. But Yeshua is telling them very directly, I want you to do, hear and do the Torah. He's referring right back to the Shema in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Hear and do. Hear, the Lord our God is one. He is Echad. And you are to keep his commandments through faith and write them on your heart. He is making it very clear, and that's why I'm going over this over and over, because I cannot stress the importance of this, that he's telling his disciples to do what the Pharisees say. And what did the Pharisees say? They quote the Torah.